At my grandson's baptism, my daughter stopped me from holding the baby. She said it in a way that others could hear, suggesting that I was too old and might drop him. I gave a small, embarrassed smile and said nothing. By Tuesday, I canceled the mortgage check. I am glad you are here. Follow my story until the end and share the city you are watching from so I can see how far it has reached. The church was filled with soft afternoon light coming through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the white baptism gown my grandson Daniel wore. I had arrived early, my heart filled with quiet excitement, thinking I would finally be able to hold him. Since his birth 3 months ago, I had not been allowed to. Vanessa always had a reason. She would say she was too busy, too tired, or that the baby was not feeling well. I saw them near the altar, Vanessa, her husband Kevin and baby Daniel, surrounded by Kevin's large family. I walked toward them slowly, holding the silver cross necklace I had brought. It had once been mine as a child, and now it was meant for Daniel. I spoke softly and reached out to him. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. She made it clear they were in the middle of something, but I explained that I only wanted to hold him for a moment before the ceremony. Instead of giving him to me, she turned and handed Daniel to her mother-in-law Linda. I stood there with my arms partly extended, feeling the rejection like a sharp blow. Then Vanessa asked me to find a good seat. I nodded, swallowing the hurt, and turned away. As I walked, I heard her voice just loud enough. She said I was too old, and that I might drop the baby. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. I was 71, not helpless. My hands were steady enough to take care of my garden, to bake cookies she still accepted, and to write the mortgage check I sent every month. I smiled and stayed quiet. That was what I always did. I kept the peace and avoided making trouble. The ceremony passed in a blur. I sat alone in the third row, watching Kevin's extended family gather around the baptismal font. No one saved me a place near the front. No one included me in the family photos afterward. I felt like I was barely noticed. At the reception in the church hall, I tried again. I approached Vanessa while she stood with other young mothers, holding Daniel. I told her he was beautiful and reached out slightly. She shifted away. I asked again if I could hold him, keeping my voice light. She hesitated, then looked past me and said someone else wanted to see him. She moved away, leaving me standing alone once more. Throughout the afternoon, I watched as Daniel was passed from one person to another. Kevin's father held him, his aunts held him. Even people who had never met him before were given the chance. But not me. Every time I came closer, Vanessa moved away. As the reception was ending, I made one last attempt. Vanessa stood alone for a moment, adjusting Daniel's blanket. I approached her and explained that I had not held him even once. She looked annoyed and said it was not a good time because he was getting fussy. I asked again, quietly, just for a minute. Then she said it loudly enough for others nearby to hear. She repeated that I was too old, that my hands were not steady, and that she did not want me to drop him. The conversation around us quieted. I felt people looking at me with pity and discomfort. My own daughter had publicly said I was not capable of holding my grandson. I drove home in silence, the hurt too deep for tears. On my kitchen counter sat my checkbook, open to the latest check I had written for Vanessa and Kevin's mortgage. The same mortgage I had been paying for 3 years. It started when they decided they needed a bigger house after Vanessa became pregnant. I thought about everything I had given her. I paid for her college, helped with her wedding, contributed to the down payment on their first home. And now I sent $2,100 every month for a house I was rarely invited to visit. I sat at my kitchen table late into the night, memories coming one after another. I remembered Vanessa as a baby holding my finger, her first day at school with a backpack almost bigger than she was, and her graduation as the first in our family. After her father died, I worked 2 jobs to give her everything, often going without myself. Now I lived in my modest home, carefully watching my limited income, while she lived comfortably in a life I had helped create but was not allowed to share. On Tuesday morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. I went to the bank and canceled the mortgage payment. Then I called and stopped the automatic transfers I had set up. For the first time in decades, I stood up for myself. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect. It was about being treated like a human being, not an ATM. That evening the phone rang. It was Vanessa. I let it go to voicemail. She said the bank had called about a problem with the mortgage payment and asked me to call back immediately. I did not. The calls continued. By Thursday, she had left 8 voicemails, each more demanding than the last. I listened to them but did not respond. This time I needed to stay strong. I was in my garden taking care of my roses when a car suddenly pulled into my driveway. The door slammed, and Vanessa walked quickly toward me, clearly angry. She demanded to know what was going on, and said the mortgage payment had failed. I calmly set my tools aside and removed my gloves, greeting her. She told me not to play games and said the bank had called Kevin at work, which had been embarrassing for him. The word embarrassing stayed with me. I wondered if she understood what that really felt like. I told her I had canceled the payment. She stared at me in shock and asked why. I said she already knew. She asked if this was about the baptism, and said I was being petty. Her words hurt, but I stood my ground. I told her wanting basic respect was not petty. She said I was punishing her financially because I had not been allowed to hold the baby, and insisted he had been fussy. I replied that he had not been too fussy for Linda, for Sophie, or for the many others who held him that day. Then I added that this was not even the main issue. The real issue was that she had humiliated me. She said that I had told everyone she believed I was too old and too unsteady to be trusted with my own grandson. Vanessa rolled her eyes and replied that she had simply been careful with her baby, adding that I was overreacting. I asked her if that was really true, then questioned when she had last visited me without needing something. I also asked when she had last called just to check how I was. She shifted slightly and said she had been busy with the baby. I continued and asked about before that, when she had last treated me like her mother instead of someone she relied on financially. She said it was not fair and reminded me that I had offered to help with the mortgage because I wanted to. I admitted that I had done it out of love, but I added that love should go both ways, and respect should as well. She crossed her arms and asked what I expected to happen now, suggesting I was ready to let them lose their home because my feelings were hurt. The way she dismissed my pain made everything clear. It confirmed that I had been right. I told her that she and Kevin both earned well and could manage their mortgage. She answered that they had a baby now and were living on one income, and that things were not that simple. I replied quietly that I had raised her on one income too. After her father died when she was 4, I had worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. She hesitated, since this was something we rarely spoke about. Her father, my husband Charles, had died of a heart attack when she was very young, and she barely remembered him. She said it had been different back then. I agreed that it had been different. I explained that I had been 29 with a 4-year-old and no college degree, while she was 35, had a partner, and between them they had 2 master's degrees. I walked over to the porch swing and sat down, suddenly feeling all 71 of my years. I asked her if she knew what I had given up for her, if she had any idea at all. She shifted and said she did not want to hear a guilt trip. I told her it was not about guilt, but about the truth. I patted the seat beside me, and after a moment she sat down, leaving a noticeable gap between us. I told her that after her father died, I had been offered a promotion at the bank, a position as assistant manager with better pay and hours, but it required moving to Cincinnati. She said I had never told her that. I explained that I had not told her because she was settled, had just started school, made friends, and was already dealing with losing her father. I could not uproot her. I looked down at my hands, the same hands she now believed were too weak to hold her child, and said that I had turned the offer down and taken a second job waiting tables at night instead. A neighbor had watched her until I returned home late. Vanessa stayed quiet, looking toward the garden. I reminded her that when she wanted to attend an expensive summer camp, I had taken extra weekend shifts. When she needed braces, I sold my mother's silver. When she was accepted into Northwestern, I took out a second mortgage to cover what her scholarships did not. She said she had never asked me to do those things, though her voice was softer now. I answered that she did not need to ask, because that is what mothers do. They sacrifice. Then I looked at her and told her that sacrifice does not mean being taken for granted, and it does not mean being treated as if I do not matter. For a brief moment, I thought she understood. Then her phone chimed, and the moment passed. She said it was Kevin asking what was happening with the money. That did not surprise me. Kevin had always relied on connections, and he had expected Vanessa to leave her job after the baby was born, even though she had earned more. He called it traditional values. I had offered help so she would have options, but instead it had only supported his expectations. I told her to tell Kevin that I would no longer be paying their mortgage, and that I would not provide any further financial support. She reacted immediately, asking if I was serious. I told her I had never been more serious. I said it was time for her and Kevin to stand on their own. She asked about Daniel and whether I cared about his future. It felt like a low blow, using the baby against me when I had not even been allowed to hold him. I told her that I loved Daniel and always would, but paying their bills was not the same as being a grandmother. She stood up abruptly and said she could not believe I was doing this, accusing me of cutting them off. I explained that I was not cutting her off, but I would no longer support a life where I was not respected or included. She looked at me with disbelief and growing panic, and asked if I was choosing money over family. I answered quietly that I was choosing self-respect, and that there was a difference. Her expression hardened. She said that in that case I should not expect to see Daniel anytime soon. The words hurt, but I stayed calm. I told her that was her choice, but reminded her that relationships go both ways. I added that when she was ready to treat me like her mother instead of her ATM, my door would remain open. She walked back to her car without another word. As she drove away, gravel scattered under the tires. I remained on the porch swing, gently rocking. For the first time in decades, I had stood my ground. It hurt deeply, but beneath the pain there was something else, a quiet sense of self-worth. I did not know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. Things would never be the same again. 2 weeks passed without any word from Vanessa. I tried to keep myself busy with gardening, book club meetings, and volunteering at the senior center, but the silence felt heavy. Every time the phone rang, I hoped it might be her, but it never was. One Sunday afternoon, while reading in my sunroom, I heard a car door slam outside. Looking out, I saw Kevin's silver SUV in my driveway. My heart began to race as I watched Vanessa step out of the passenger side, her expression cold. Kevin followed, looking just as serious. I took a deep breath and adjusted my cardigan, knowing this moment had been inevitable. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door and saw them standing close together, presenting a united front. Kevin spoke formally and asked if they could come in. I stepped aside and let them enter. They came into my living room, but did not sit down at first. I noticed right away, with a sharp pang, that they had not brought Daniel with them. Kevin began speaking immediately, saying they needed to discuss the financial situation, and that things could not go on like this. I gestured toward the couch and asked them to sit. They exchanged looks before finally sitting down. I settled into my armchair across from them, folding my hands in my lap to hide the slight trembling. Vanessa began, her voice controlled, explaining that they had already used their savings to cover the mortgage that month, and that it was not sustainable. I answered calmly that I understood it must be difficult. Kevin leaned forward and said with polite formality that he did not think I truly understood. He reminded me that they had bought the house based on my commitment to help with the payments. I replied that I did not remember signing any agreement. His expression tightened, and he said it had been a verbal promise. I answered that such a promise depends on mutual respect, which seemed to be lacking lately. Vanessa's composure broke, and she asked if this was still about the baptism, saying I was being unreasonable. I asked her when she had last invited me over to see Daniel, and when she had last called just to talk, not to ask for money. She said they had been busy with the baby. I repeated the idea, asking if they had really been too busy even for a phone call, or too busy to let me hold my grandson even once. Vanessa looked away and could not meet my eyes. Kevin stepped in and said that whatever issues existed between me and Vanessa should not affect the financial arrangement. I looked at him carefully. Kevin had always been polite, but there was always a hint of condescension, as if he were indulging me. I asked him how he would feel if his own parents were treated the way I had been, excluded from their grandchild's life, embarrassed in public, and only contacted when money was needed. He shifted and said it was different. I asked him what he meant. Before he could answer, Vanessa interrupted, saying they had not come to discuss feelings, only the mortgage. Her dismissal of my emotions struck deeply. For years, I had pushed aside my own needs for hers. I had worked overtime when I was exhausted so she could have dance lessons. I had eaten simple meals so she could have new clothes. I had delayed retirement to help pay for her wedding. And now my pain was not even worth discussing. I asked her if she remembered when she was 16 and crashed the car I had saved for years to buy. She looked confused by the shift. I continued, reminding her what she had said then, that the car could be replaced, but she could not, and that what mattered most was that she was safe. I leaned forward and told her that it worked both ways. I was more than just a checkbook. I was a person, her mother, and I deserved to be treated like one. Kevin tried to interrupt again, but I stopped him, surprising even myself with my firmness, and told him they had spoken, and now it was my turn. I stood up, straightening fully. I told them that for years I had been their safety net, the one who made everything easier. And I had done it willingly because that is what mothers do. But I would no longer accept being treated like a servant, like an ATM, or like someone too old and useless to be trusted with her own grandson. Vanessa looked at me with surprise. I told them clearly that I had made my decision. I would not resume the mortgage payments, and I would not give them any more money until something changed between us. Kevin stood up quickly and said this was unfair. I answered calmly that it was not unfair, it was a boundary, one I should have set long ago. Vanessa stood as well, frustration visible, asking if I was really going to let them struggle. I told her they were not struggling, that they had a beautiful home, 2 cars and more than enough. They might need to cut back, but they would not go without basic needs. She said they might lose the house. I replied that if that happened, they could find a smaller one, just as I had done after her father died. Kevin put his arm around her shoulders and said they should go, that the conversation was not leading anywhere. As they reached the door, Vanessa turned back and said I should not expect to see Daniel if I was not willing to help them. The words hurt deeply, exactly as she intended, but I remained calm. I told her it was her choice, but one day Daniel would ask why he never knew his grandmother, and she would have to answer him. For a moment, doubt appeared on her face. Then Kevin pulled her along and they left. I sank back into my chair, trembling. I had finally done it. After a lifetime of giving and keeping the peace, I had stood up for myself. The house felt emptier than ever as their car drove away. The silence was overwhelming. I knew what might come, lonely days and sleepless nights, thinking about a grandson I might never truly know. But for the first time in years, even through the pain, I felt something else. A quiet sense of self-respect. Evening came. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my garden, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would never go back to being invisible again. A month after the confrontation, autumn arrived, covering the neighborhood in deep reds and golds. I watched the seasons change from my kitchen window, feeling time pass more sharply than ever. My 72nd birthday came and went without a call from Vanessa. The silence between us had turned into a wall. I had kept my word. No more checks, no more financial help. And she had kept hers. No contact, no access to Daniel. Every day I fought the urge to give in, to call her and say I would start paying again. The thought of my grandson growing up without knowing me weighed heavily on my heart. But each time I started to give in, I remembered the look on Vanessa's face at the baptism, the ease with which she dismissed me. If I gave up now, nothing would really change. On a crisp Saturday morning, I was raking leaves when I heard a familiar voice warning that I would hurt my back doing that. I turned and saw Eleanor Bennett walking up my driveway, holding a covered dish. We had worked together at the same elementary school before retiring, though we had drifted apart over the years. I asked what brought her by. She lifted the dish slightly and said it was pumpkin bread and curiosity, adding that she had not seen me at church coffee hour lately. I leaned on my rake, suddenly aware of how alone I had become, and said it had been a difficult few months. Eleanor nodded kindly and said she had heard about the situation with Vanessa, mentioning that in a small town news spreads quickly. My cheeks warmed as I asked what she had heard. She said I had cut Vanessa off financially, and that now Vanessa was keeping the baby from me. Then added that there is always more to any story. I hesitated, then invited her onto the porch for coffee with the bread. An hour later, she sat across from me at my kitchen table, listening as I told her everything. The years of giving, the humiliation at the baptism, and the ultimatum. When I finished, she said I had done the right thing and that she did not say that lightly. I asked why it still felt so awful, my voice unsteady. She reached across and squeezed my hand, explaining that mothers are used to putting their children first, even when it is not healthy. I said quietly that I missed Daniel, that I had only seen him twice and might never really know him. Eleanor said Vanessa could not keep him from me forever, and that eventually she would realize what she was doing. Then she added more seriously that if she did not, I would have to decide whether my self-respect was worth the cost. She reminded me that giving in now would not fix anything, but would only teach Vanessa she could control me through the baby. After Eleanor left, I stood in the small room I had prepared for Daniel. It was a bright, cheerful space with a crib I had restored, shelves of children's books, and a rocking chair by the window. I had painted clouds on the ceiling and hung colorful mobiles, all for a grandson who might never sleep there. I sat in the rocking chair, holding back tears. The house felt empty. Vanessa had been my whole world for so long. And without her, without Daniel, I did not know who I was. That thought stayed with me as days turned into weeks. Eleanor began visiting regularly, sometimes bringing baked goods, sometimes just for company. She encouraged me to go with her to the senior center for Tai Chi, introduced me to her book club, and insisted on weekly walks in the park. She told me directly that I needed a life beyond Vanessa, reminding me that I had one before she was born, and could have one again. Slowly, I began to come out of my isolation. I volunteered at the library during children's reading hour, where the laughter of toddlers eased the pain of missing Daniel. I joined a gardening club, and discovered I had a talent for growing rare orchids. I even signed up for a watercolor class at the community college, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for before. As Thanksgiving approached, Eleanor invited me to spend the holiday with her family. She said her son and his wife would be coming from Chicago with their children, and that they would be happy to meet me. I hesitated, saying I did not want to intrude. Eleanor looked at me firmly, and said I would not spend Thanksgiving alone watching the parade and eating a frozen dinner. That is how I ended up at her table on Thanksgiving Day, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her grandson Ryan, only a few months older than Daniel, reached out to me, and I felt a bittersweet warmth as I held him. Her daughter-in-law said I seemed very natural with him. I answered quietly that I had some experience, thinking of when Vanessa was a baby, and how perfectly she had once fit in my arms. Later, as we sat drinking coffee, my phone rang. It was Vanessa. My heart jumped as I stepped into the hallway to answer. She said she wanted to wish me a happy Thanksgiving. I thanked her and returned the greeting, waiting. She asked how I was. I said I was well, and mentioned I was spending the day with a friend and her family. Then I asked about Daniel. She said he was fine, growing quickly and starting to crawl. Hearing that made my chest ache. There was a pause before she spoke again, saying she had been thinking and that maybe I could come see Daniel sometime, even if just for a short visit. Hope rose in me, and I said I would like that very much. But she quickly added that we needed to talk about the financial situation first, saying things were very tight. And there it was again, not a real attempt to reconnect, but a negotiation. Seeing Daniel in exchange for money. My resolve weakened for a moment. I wondered if it would be wrong to give in just to be part of my grandson's life. Then I remembered Eleanor's words. Giving in would not fix what was broken. I told Vanessa carefully that I wanted to see Daniel, but my financial decision would not change, and that the two were not connected. Her voice became cold, saying that for her they were connected, and that if I cared about my grandson, I would help them keep their home. I said I did care about Daniel, but I also wanted a real relationship with her, not one based on money. She responded sharply and ended the call. I stood in the hallway with the phone in my hand, tears running down my face. When I returned to the living room, Eleanor understood immediately and came to hug me. I told her the call had been about negotiation, not reconciliation. She said gently that only I could decide if I had done the right thing, but added that I looked better than I had in years, that there was a light in my eyes that had not been there before. As I drove home that night, I thought about her words. The pain was still there, but something else had begun to grow alongside it. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself. Not just as Vanessa's mother or Daniel's grandmother, but as Olivia. And despite everything, that felt like a step forward. Winter gave way to spring, and still there was no word from Vanessa. I had settled into a routine: Tai Chi on Mondays, volunteering at the library on Wednesdays, and lunch with Eleanor on Fridays. My watercolor paintings had improved enough that the community center asked to display them in their annual art show. For my 72nd birthday, Eleanor and my new friends from the gardening club threw me a surprise party. Life went on, even with the Vanessa-shaped hole in my heart. Then, on a rainy April afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Eleanor was visiting her sister in Florida, and my book club meeting had been canceled because of the weather. I opened the door and saw Vanessa standing on my porch, soaking wet, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. I stepped aside and asked what was wrong, letting her come in. She entered hesitantly, water dripping from her raincoat onto the floor. She said she didn't know where else to go, her voice breaking. I guided her to the living room and helped her take off her wet coat. I got her a towel and asked if she was hurt, and if Daniel was okay. She said Daniel was fine, and that he was with Kevin's mother. She sank onto the couch, looking completely worn out. I brought her a towel and a cup of hot tea, then sat nearby, keeping a respectful distance, and asked her to tell me what had happened. She stared into her teacup, avoiding my eyes, and said everything was falling apart. She explained that Kevin had lost his job 3 weeks ago. I told her I was sorry. She added that his father had tried to get him another position at the firm, but there were ethics issues, and now no one in town would hire him. She wiped her eyes and said she couldn't go back to work either, since no one was hiring in her field and childcare was too expensive. I listened as she continued. They had missed 2 mortgage payments, and the bank had sent a final notice the day before. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears, and said they were going to lose the house. Despite everything, my heart ached for her. I asked what Kevin was saying about it. Her face crumpled as she said they had been fighting constantly. He had been drinking more and staying out late. She hesitated, then said he had blamed her. He said it was her fault, that if she hadn't pushed me away, they would still have my support. He said she should have treated me better, and let me see Daniel more. She gave a bitter laugh and said it wasn't because it was the right thing, but because they needed the money. I sat still, taking it in, and asked what she thought. She shrugged miserably and said he was right, that she had messed everything up. Part of me wanted to comfort her and fix everything like I always had. But another part, stronger now, held back. I asked why she had come and what she wanted from me. She looked surprised and said she needed help. When I asked if she meant financial help, she nodded, looking down. She said they needed $14,000 to catch up on the mortgage and stop the foreclosure. I took a deep breath and asked what would happen if I gave them the money, whether I would be allowed to see Daniel and be part of their lives. She reacted to my tone and said she knew she had treated me badly and could see that now. I leaned forward and asked her to look at me. She did, reluctantly. I told her I loved her, always had, and nothing, not distance, not hurt, not rejection, could change that. Her lip trembled. But I also said I wouldn't be used anymore. I couldn't have a relationship based on money. She tried to protest, but I asked if that wasn't exactly the situation. I pointed out she was here because she needed money, and asked if she would be here otherwise. She had no answer. I asked how many times she had called just to check on me, or thought about bringing Daniel to see me without needing anything. Tears ran down her cheeks as she said she had made a mess of everything. I softened slightly and said not everything was ruined, but she had hurt me deeply and kept Daniel away from someone who loved him. She said she knew. I reached out and took her hand. The first time in months. I told her I would help her, but not in the way she wanted. She tightened her grip and asked what I meant. I explained I wouldn't give her $14,000 to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford, but I would help her find a more affordable place, help her look for work, and watch Daniel during interviews so she wouldn't have to pay for childcare. Her expression showed disappointment and confusion. She asked if I was saying no to the money. I told her I was saying yes to being her mother, not her bank. She pulled her hand away and said they couldn't just downsize, asking what people would think, saying all their friends lived there. I answered gently that what people think doesn't pay the mortgage, and that people who only value you for your address aren't real friends. She stood up suddenly and said she had made a mistake coming. I told her calmly I wasn't punishing her, but refusing to support behavior that wasn't healthy for either of us. I explained that she and Kevin were living beyond their means, and relying on others to fill the gap, which couldn't continue. She raised her voice and asked if I was going to let them become homeless. I said they wouldn't be homeless, that there were plenty of nice apartments in town, or they could move somewhere cheaper. She said this was her home. Home is where your family is, Vanessa, not a specific house. She picked up her still damp coat and said she should have known I would not help, adding that I did not care about them at all. The accusation hurt, but I held my ground. I said I cared enough not to throw money at a problem that money could not fix, and enough to offer real help instead of a temporary solution. She told me to keep my help and moved toward the door, saying they would figure things out on their own. I followed her and asked her not to leave like that. She stopped at the door with her back to me and said the worst part was that Kevin had been right, that she should have been kinder to me, not because it was right but because they needed me. She wondered what kind of person that made her. Before I could answer, she left, the door closing behind her. I sank into my armchair, completely drained. I questioned whether I had done the right thing, or if I had only pushed my daughter further away when she needed me. At 10 p.m., the phone rang. I answered right away, expecting Vanessa. Instead, it was Linda, Kevin's mother. She told me I needed to come to the hospital because of Vanessa. My heart dropped as I asked what had happened and whether she was hurt. Linda said it was not like that. Vanessa was having a breakdown. Kevin had brought Daniel to her earlier, saying he could not manage both the baby and Vanessa. Then the hospital had called. Vanessa had checked herself in and was asking for me. I was already reaching for my keys, saying I was on my way. The hospital corridors were quiet at that hour, my footsteps echoing as a nurse led me to the psychiatric ward. I had never seen Vanessa in a place like that, and it frightened me. When I entered the room, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. She looked smaller somehow, without her usual composure. I said her name softly. She turned, her eyes red, and asked if I had come. I told her of course I had and sat beside her, careful not to crowd her, asking what had happened. She shook her head and said she did not know. After leaving my house, she said she had completely broken down. She had been driving when suddenly she could not breathe or think. She pulled over and sat there crying for hours. She looked down at her hands and said she did not recognize herself anymore, who she had become or what she had done. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. She said she went to Linda's to check on Daniel, but Kevin was there. He was angry and said she was making a scene. They argued again. After that, she left and kept driving until she ended up at the hospital. I told her softly I was sorry. She said the doctor called it acute anxiety and depression, and wanted her to stay a few days. I nodded and said whatever she needed. She looked at me carefully, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years, and asked why I was being kind after everything. I told her I was her mother, and that does not stop, even when things are difficult. Her face broke, and she said she had been awful, using Daniel, treating me like a source of money, humiliating me. I acknowledged it quietly. She said she did not know why she had become like that. That somewhere along the way she had started seeing me not as her mother. Tears ran down her face as she said she was ashamed. I took her hand and said we had both made mistakes. Me by allowing things that were not healthy, and her by taking advantage of it, but that we could start again. She asked how, saying everything was a mess, her home, Kevin, her marriage. I said we would figure it out one step at a time. She leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder like when she was small, and said she was sorry. I told her I knew. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital visits, talking with doctors, and taking care of Daniel while she received treatment. Linda helped when she could, but Kevin was mostly absent, staying elsewhere after another argument. Daniel was a joy, 9 months old, crawling everywhere, constantly babbling. I had missed so much already. But as I rocked him to sleep each night in my spare room, singing the same lullabies I once sang to Vanessa, I felt both sadness and warmth. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected places. When Vanessa was released 5 days later, she came to stay with me, saying it would be just until she figured things out. I told her to stay as long as she needed. The first weeks were awkward. We were both careful, avoiding old wounds, learning again how to be mother and daughter. We argued at times, but we also talked, really talked, in a way we had not for years. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing watching the sunset while Daniel slept inside, Vanessa said Kevin wanted to reconcile. He said he would get help and find a new job. I kept my expression neutral and asked what she wanted. She was quiet for a long moment and said she did not know. Part of her thought she should try for Daniel, but another part felt she deserved better. She said they had lost the house and that the bank had foreclosed the previous week. I told her I was sorry. She said, almost surprisingly, that she was not. She said it had never really felt like a home, more like something to show off. I squeezed her hand and told her she would make a real home wherever she went. She said she did not know where to go next, but had been thinking about starting over somewhere more affordable. She mentioned a teaching position in Burlington as an elementary school art teacher, saying she had always loved art. She said it was beautiful there, with good schools and affordable housing, but that it was far away. She hesitated and said it would be far from me. I thought about everything, the life I had rebuilt and the family I had nearly lost. Then I said slowly that I could come with her. She looked surprised and asked if I would really leave everything. I reminded her that home is where family is, and that real friends can be visited. I added that I had heard Vermont had excellent gardening clubs. Tears filled her eyes as she asked what about my life here. You've built something for yourself. I answered that I had, and that it mattered, but so did she and Daniel. I glanced out at the twilight settling over my garden, and explained that I wasn't suggesting we live together, because that would not be healthy for either of us. But living nearby, close enough for Sunday dinners and bedtime stories with Daniel, sounded wonderful to me. Vanessa rested her head on my shoulder, something she had begun doing often since her hospital stay. She wondered if I would really start over at 72. I told her that life offers new beginnings at any age, adding with a small laugh that I had heard the fall colors in Vermont were beautiful enough to paint. 1 year later, I stood in my new kitchen in Burlington, placing freshly baked cookies on a plate. Through the window, I could see the bright autumn colors covering the mountains in the distance. My watercolor paintings of the landscape hung on the walls of my small but cozy cottage, located just 3 blocks from Vanessa's apartment. The doorbell rang, and I smiled, already knowing who it was. Sunday dinner had become our routine. Vanessa stood outside, with Daniel, now an energetic toddler, resting on her hip. She said they had brought wine, holding up the bottle, and I replied that I had made lasagna, stepping aside to welcome them in. Daniel slid down and ran toward me, reaching out his arms. He asked to be picked up, and I lifted him, enjoying the weight of his small body against mine, his arms wrapped around my neck. I greeted him warmly and asked about his week at daycare. As he chattered in his toddler way, Vanessa moved around the kitchen comfortably, opening the wine, setting the table, and finishing the salad she had brought. She mentioned, almost casually, that she had received a promotion and would be working full-time as an art teacher starting next semester, though the pride in her expression was clear. I told her that was wonderful and hugged her with one arm while still holding Daniel. She added that this meant she could now afford a larger place, mentioning a small house for rent near the elementary school with 2 bedrooms and a yard for Daniel. I said it sounded perfect. She hesitated slightly and explained that it was actually just around the corner from me, asking if that might be too close because she did not want me to feel crowded. I laughed and told her that after a year of seeing each other several times a week, we had already proven we could maintain healthy boundaries. Rebuilding our relationship had not been easy. There had been difficult conversations, tears, and even some setbacks. Kevin had made a few weak attempts to reconcile before eventually agreeing to a peaceful divorce. Vanessa had returned to therapy, working through her struggles with money, status, and self-worth. As for me, I had learned how to be a mother without losing myself, how to love without sacrificing my identity, and how to give without being taken advantage of. As we sat down to dinner, with Daniel in his seat between us. Vanessa raised her glass to new beginnings. I smiled and clinked my glass with hers, adding that it was also about understanding our own value. Daniel tapped his cup on the table, making both of us laugh. Outside, the Vermont sunset colored the sky in shades of gold and pink, more beautiful than anything I could ever paint. But inside, in that simple family moment, I realized that this joy was what I had been waiting for all along. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in her place? Have you ever experienced something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the end.